Welcome to the AlzAuthors podcast. We're so glad you found us. We're the global community of authors writing about Alzheimer's and dementia from personal experience to light the way for others. I'm Marianne Sciucco, a registered nurse, author, and dementia daughter.
And I'm Christy Byrne-Yates, a licensed educational psychologist, dementia daughter, AlzAuthor, and coach focused on the sandwich generation. Please join us for bi-weekly episodes with our authors as we talk about their dementia journeys, sharing intimate details and painfully obtained knowledge to help others currently on that path.
We hope these stories offer you comfort and support as we strive to break the silence and stigma surrounding a dementia diagnosis.
May one of our authors speak to your experience.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
Hi, I'm Jean Lee from AlzAuthors. All the resources we offer at AlzAuthors.com, including this podcast, are brought to you free of charge, and our authors incur no expense for inclusion. Our management team is a dedicated group of passionate volunteers who earn no financial compensation. But to continue our mission to provide valuable resources to dementia caregivers, we need the support of listeners like you. If you'd like to support us, please make a donation at alzauthors.com/donate. We are a 501c3 organization. Remember, you are not alone.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to an episode of Books and Chit Chat, brought to you by AlzAuthors and Aging and Amazing. This episode features Florrie Munat, author of Be Brave, A Wife's Journey Through Caregiving. This episode is moderated by Marianne Sciucco. Marianne is a founder and manager at AlzAuthors and the author of Blue Hydrangeas, an Alzheimer's Love Story. Now, let's get to the episode.
Hello and welcome to Books and Chit Chat with Aging and Amazing, featuring Florrie Munat and her memoir, Be Brave, A Wife's Journey Through Caregiving. I'm Marianne Sciucco, a founder and manager at AlzAuthors, the global community of authors writing about Alzheimer's and dementia from personal experience to light the way for others. Our moderator, Andrea Couture, is unable to join us tonight, but will return next month. I'd like to introduce some of the members of our team who are with us today. Christy Byrne-Yates, author of Building a Legacy of Love, Thriving in the Sandwich Generation, based upon her caregiving journey with two parents with dementia. She is my podcast co-host and producer and is helping me to host this event. Malika Moore is a licensed social worker and an aging life care professional in the District of Columbia and Maryland. She founded Aging and Amazing, which is a company that strives to support older adults, caregivers, and the networks that surround them. Malika has served in several different capacities in her professional career, including clinician, geriatric care manager, medical social worker, psychotherapist, support group facilitator, and adjunct professor. Allie Parker is Malika's associate and an undergraduate college student at the University of Maryland studying psychology. She plans to go into mental health therapy and has a special interest in the older population. And we also have Ruth Stevens here tonight. She's the author of Stage 7, a novel, and March's featured author. And Ann Campanella, another member of our management team and the author of Motherhood, Lost and Found, is with us this evening. And also Sue Fagaldi Lick, a poet and author of Gravel Road Ahead, amongst many other titles, who's currently pulling together our poetry anthology. So thank you, ladies, for being with us this evening. I'd like to introduce our featured author, Florrie Munat. Florrie is actually one of the authors in AlzAuthors that I have had the honor of meeting in person. We met at a caregiving conference in Chicago in 2018. Her memoir, Be Brave, is the story of her caregiving journey with her husband, Chuck, who suffered a stroke, which was followed by Lewy body dementia. She comes to us from Bainbridge Island in Washington State. Welcome, Florrie. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marianne. And I just want to also say that I was honored to meet you and Anne, who was sort of my special angel in Chicago when I was presenting there. And you guys took me under your wing. And I had such a great time in Chicago. I was terrified because I was presenting in front of a huge audience, and they came to hear me, and it was really wonderful. And I am so impressed with what you've done since then. That was 2018, and you've published so many works that are of such help to caregivers, to one another. So thank you all. Thank you for that.
Thank you. That's very kind.
Well, I think maybe I could just tell you a little bit about my caregiving journey. Most of us go through caregiving. We enter caregiving in kind of a gradual way, and in a way that was happening to me. It was just I didn't recognize it when it was happening. My husband was having lapses, but I didn't really have the context or the vocabulary to say, "Oh my goodness, he must be in early stage dementia." He was 13 years older than I. And I think I just thought, well, I guess this is how people age. And so our initial event that sent us into this caregiving journey was a stroke, as Marianne said. I wonder if I could read just a little part of my first chapter, which talks about that moment when
Sure.
It's from a chapter called The Day Everything Changed. And Chuck and I had gone to our weekly Tai Chi class at the senior center. And it was just a beautiful June day like any other, or so we thought. And this will also give you a little introduction to Chuck. I'd like you to get to know him a little bit because I view my memoir as kind of a love letter to my husband. So we were at the Tai Chi class. We finished the class. I left the senior center and was walking up the hill, and I sat down at a bench and was waiting for him to come. So this is from The Day Everything Changed. I saw Chuck emerge from the senior center and make his way up the path. 35 years had passed since I'd first laid eyes on him in a crowded high school gymnasium on the south side of Chicago. I spent the next several weeks admiring his teaching skills and the rapport he had with his students. In the fall of 1968, his thick gray hair and beard were neatly trimmed, though back then everyone thought anyone with a beard was a radical, which he kind of was. His functional wardrobe consisted of black or dark brown pants, white short-sleeve shirts, and thrift store sports coats. Vigorous and engaging, he had kind hazel eyes, an uninhibited laugh, and a sneeze that could rattle window panes. His family scraped by on his teacher's salary, which he supplemented by working as a janitor at a Montessori school to earn his children's tuition there, teaching Saturday morning GED classes, and commuting to the southern edge of Chicago to teach summer school in one of the city's most violent public housing projects. Today, at Waterfront Park, I observed a man in his late 60s, tall, but slightly stooped, with a full white beard and thinning white hair worn in a ponytail. Still the independent thinker, still the man who would defend those he loved, including his family and every underdog he ever met. I knew his faraway smile meant that the world had just offered him another gift, and he was grateful to receive it. Though he had long ago abandoned Catholicism, Chuck saw the world as sacramental. A bird, a brook, a baby, they all represented life's abundant blessings, He worshiped the natural world and was a man of peace and love, which was how he always signed his letters. Peace and love, Chuck. When someone you love ages, you don't often notice the incremental changes that the years bring. Watching him walk up the hill that morning, my only thought was, here comes Chuck. And I smiled in anticipation of what he would say when he joined me. It was all magnificently normal until I noticed that he was shuffling through the gravel as if his canvas shoes were filled with cement. And he came and sat down next to me, his mouth drooped, and I am not a nurse, but I recognized the signs of stroke. So we got him quickly. The EMTs came and took him by ambulance to a hospital in Seattle. We live on an island, about half an hour ferry ride away. And he received, the top treatment, the gold standard TPA for a stroke that's caused by a clot. And the neurologists were very hopeful, and they said he should recover. We got within the good window of time, and this is looking very good. But he did not recover. Every day I visited him in the hospital. He grew worse. His cognition was worse. Physically, he eventually grew worse. And it was really mystifying because we didn't understand what was happening. And I was very new to all this. I didn't even understand the vocabulary people were using with me, like, well, if we assess him and he's good enough to go into rehab, we can do it here in the hospital, or else he might have to go to another facility and then come back. And I honestly, I had no idea what they were talking about. I didn't know what a facility was. I just was really in the dark. So he was in the hospital 3 weeks. He came back to the island. He did go to a skilled nursing facility for more therapy. I had him home for 2 weeks. It was unfortunately a really difficult, nightmarish time. He was not sleeping. He was wandering the house at night and falling. I wasn't sleeping. And we just got to a point where it's like, I can't do this anymore. So I readmitted him to the skilled nursing facility, thinking that he still would recover and come home. But finally, 4 months after his stroke, we got a neurologist to give him a brain scan, a SPECT scan. And when the neurologist came into the room with us, and some of my children were there and their partners were there, and Chuck and I were there, and the neurologist said, the scan shows results, abnormalities that are indicative of Lewy body dementia. And so that was the day we knew that we were not going to have recovery. But that did not mean that there could not be healing and that there could not be hope. And so Chuck continued to live at Island Health and Rehabilitation Center for the next 6 years. And that was the marathon of the journey. I thought it was going to be a sprint, but it was not. So I had to learn how to adapt, and he had to learn how to adapt. So that's kind of the story, the overall story. And I don't know where we want to go from here. If you want to ask questions, you want to tell your own story, I'm up for anything. So what do you think, Marianne?
I liked the way, and you just said it in the book, you had the stroke, which you considered to be your sprint, your caregiving sprint, because you thought you could see an end and his health would be restored and maybe life would go back to semi-normal state. But then when the dementia diagnosis came, you realized that the sprint was over and now you were in this marathon. It was just such a amazing way to phrase that.
Yes, thank you. One of the first things that we did after he got his diagnosis was we celebrated a Celtic holiday called Samhain. It's November 1st. It's actually the first day of the Irish year. And this is described in the book too, but Chuck identified as Irish, and our son had been to Ireland, and he identified as Irish too. And so they wanted to do this. So we had a harvest meal. We had candles, new candles, threw away old candles. we planted flower bulbs, which has become one of my favorite symbols for transformation. And that's essentially what happens. I think when you stick with a long caregiving experience like that, that there are times when you feel like a flower bulb and you're lying underground and there's a lot of dirt on you and it's very dark and you can't see where it's going or how this could possibly resolve in any way that's good. But like the flower bulb, you poke through the ground after some germination time, and it's slow. It's a slow process, but there is hope and there is light, and it will come, and there will be transformation. That's my favorite word talking about caregiving. And I know I have the luxury of, hindsight, looking back on it. It's been a while since I was a caregiver. I don't think transformation is something that you know that you're going through while you're going through it because it's so slow. But I'll bet every one of you who's sitting here today who's a caregiver, and I know a lot of you have been, would consider yourself transformed by caregiving. That when you began, you couldn't imagine the things you were going to learn or the things that you were strong enough to do. So with that perspective, and again, it's not really something you want to say to someone who's in the midst of hardship and wintering. You don't want to say, well, don't worry, you're being transformed. That's really not a very helpful thing to say. They probably want to say, just leave me alone. I'm in pain here, But it does happen. It's not a reason for suffering. It's just that suffering has outcomes, and sometimes the outcomes are good. We grow, we change, we become more empathetic. And I think that's why we're all here today, because we've shared caregiving experiences and we know we kind of owe one another, to tell each other our stories, to strengthen each other and to say, chin up, you can do this.
Oh, well said. Thank you. Sue, did you want to add something?
Yes, I wondered, I took care of my husband. He had Alzheimer's, and the timing when I read your book, it was almost exactly the same years that we were going through it. So I was like, oh gosh, she's right on the same schedule. At one point, they thought he might have Lewy body, but turned out not to. But can you talk about the difference between Lewy body dementia and other kinds?
A little bit. I think there may be others who know more than I do. I'm not a doctor or anything, but I know that it's more Lewy. Well, it's a progressive dementia like Alzheimer's, and it's probably the second most common progressive dementia in the elderly. There are 1.4 million people that have Lewy body dementia in the United States. It seems to me that it's more of sort of the loss of executive functioning and thinking, and not so much the forgetfulness. Not that I never really heard Chuck do that kind of looped, asking the same question over and over and over again. That didn't seem to be something that he suffered from. But I would also say that every case is unique, and I think actually, well, I won't say we had a good time of it, but it was, he always knew who I was. He didn't always know my name, but he knew I was somebody who cared for him. Another characteristic of Lewy body is that you have fluctuations in cognition. So there are days when the person can be very, very cognitively aware and almost like normal. And then other days when they are just really not clicking at all. There's also features of Parkinsonism, and sometimes Lewy body is mistakenly diagnosed as Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's disease or both. But in Chuck's case, when he was given, they thought he had Parkinson's, and when he was given medications for Parkinson's, he did not do better. It made him worse. And that's how they that's another symptom that they sort of just think, well, it probably is Lewy body. Their sleep disorders is another thing. Visual hallucinations early in the disease, which he did have, and like in the first year, he had hallucinations, and then they just seemed to go away. Does that help? I mean, you all know Alzheimer's probably better than I do, so maybe you'd like to chime in with some of those. symptoms and things you deal with.
I'm still not sure if he had a little bit of Lewy body too, because a lot of the things were familiar. And boy, those hallucinations are really challenging, aren't they?
Can be, yeah.
Does anybody have anything else to say on that topic? No. What struck me as I read, I made some notes in the book. I think it was on page 39. You were talking about your guilt, and you were talking about your need to always be there. That you needed to go through this with him together. That even though it was he was the one that was having this experience and this illness, that you felt that you needed to go with him on the same journey. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, that was not a sustainable way of responding to caregiving. Yeah, I did. I would go there at 8 in the morning to the nursing facility at 8 in the morning and stay till 6 or 7 at night. I mean, I was killing myself. I really, I mean, that was more actually before we got the Lewy body diagnosis. After we had the diagnosis for dementia, and I realized this was going to be a long haul. Then I did cut back, but I still went every afternoon for a couple of years. And then some friends of mine said to me, "You've got to stop, just take a day off." Even God rested on the 7th day. You can take a rest. It's good for you. And when I did take respite care, I'd come back much refreshed. I'm sure a lot of you have had that experience. You really need it. It felt selfish to me at the time. Yes, and I also felt guilt, which is kind of strange because I wasn't responsible, but somehow I felt like maybe I was responsible for, I'm supposed to take care of my husband, right? He's not supposed to be sick like this. And so I thought, well, this is on me. I didn't think it, I felt it, I think. One of the best things that I did for self-care was to see a therapist. And she helped me validate my role as a caregiver, but also, look, you're going to need to have a life of your own, and you most likely will end up alone one day, and I have. You need to think about that life and how you want that to be. And she also told me something really important, which was this: because your husband is in a care facility does not mean that you are not lovable, that you are not capable. It just means you've got limits. You've got limits, and you have to observe those limits. And people have different limits too. Some people could have done, probably kept Chuck at home, or not Chuck, but their loved one at home. I could not do that. That was not, and some people are working full time or caring for children. Those are limiting circumstances. You can't just give yourself heart and soul to this person. It's not psychologically a good option for either me or Chuck.
And you said in the book that when it became apparent that he was now going to be at the facility permanently, that the staff said to you, "We'll take care of him now." And that reminds me of Dr. Renee Harmon, when her husband, they were a young couple when he had early onset Alzheimer's, and when she admitted him to the nursing home, finally, they said to her, "Now your only job is to love him. We'll take care of him." When she heard that, it just really freed her, she said, because she realized that all the day-to-day stuff that has to get done, she didn't need to do it anymore. She could just focus on loving him and having a loving relationship and coming to him and being, fresh and not stressed. And it was like a gift.
For sure. Yeah. A turning point for me was, again, it happened gradually, but it was when I stopped thinking of caregiving as a duty and started thinking of it as more of a blessing or a privilege. And, there's a spectrum there. I mean, I didn't just go all the way to the blessing part, and because days are hard. We all know that. Some days are very hard. And, but one of my favorite quotes is from Somerset Maugham. He said, when when love and duty are one, then grace is within you. I thought there is a duty, there is an aspect of duty about it, of course, but when the love becomes really the operating factor, you can really hang on to that love, and it takes you a long way. It takes you a long way.
Mm. Malika, did you want to say something?
I wanted to ask you with the gift, you mentioned the gift of hindsight. I know that just over the years, like facilitating caregiver support groups, I would have people say, I moved my husband or my mother or whoever into a care facility. Am I still a caregiver? And really feel that grief and guilt and just tons of emotions. I'm wondering, and it sounds like you had a great facility, so you were able to relax a little bit more, where for some it may become more of a duty to make sure they're on top of everything. I guess my question to you is, with the gift of hindsight, what would you tell a caregiver who's wondering, like, am I still a caregiver?
Totally, 100%. You are a caregiver. You're not a 24/7 caregiver, but yes, you're an advocate. You said it was it sounded like a great facility. I would say it was a very good facility. But the workers in facilities like that have so much to do. They were hard workers. They were lovely people, almost like 99% of them. But they couldn't do all the work. And so when I would be there in the afternoons, I was actually doing the work of caregiving. I mean, I was bathing him because he liked a special type of spa bath. There was a whirlpool. And I thought, well, this is something I can give him that gives him pleasure. And, brushing his teeth and taking him out for drives and all that kind of thing. So, yeah, I can see why people might feel that way, or maybe they get feedback from others saying like, well, you put your husband or your mother in home and now you don't have to worry. And it's like, that was not my experience.
Everything else goes on, like my experience is that I get from my stepfather and my mom, I was getting calls and interrupting my days in the nighttime with all kinds of stuff that's going on, questions and concerns and issues and emergencies, and having to manage all of the finances and the legalities that were associated with that, and the discharge planning. And so, and I was a long distance caregiver too. So, and then when I would go visit, like I was like Florrie, but because I would only be there for like 3 days or whatever. So I would spend all of my time with mom. She'd be there at 8 a.m., bring her coffee and stay till she had her dinner, because I only saw her those 3 days that month. So I didn't want to spend time and not be with her. But it wasn't, it's different, you don't day to day and having to do, a lot of the tasks associated with it, but you're not off the hook by any means. You may even be on the hook more.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I found.
And even when you're not there, you're thinking about them most of the time. I think being a long distance caregiver would have special difficulties associated with it. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that.
Well, you have to trust other people to be your eyes and ears, because like I would show up, every 2-3 weeks and stay, but when I wasn't there, and other people would be going in and out and visiting and interacting, and they would report it back to me. And so I had to trust them. And so there's a lot of that, and I would prefer it if I could just go every day and see what was going on. But you can't do that. And the other thing is in some instances, the spouse or the person that's in the facility has a telephone and they can be calling. No, Krista, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to speak to that because I know we want to get to Ruth's question too. But Malika, what a great question. And Florrie, wow, you're right. I mean, I feel like you're still a caregiver 100%. And what it makes me think of is something that I've been hearing a lot more, not just in the realm of caregiving for an older person, but just even in any kind of caregiving that you might be doing. It might be raising your kids or whatever. It's the mental load that you have, that emotional load that you carry with you. Because even if you're not able to be there every day to see your person, it's not like a day goes by that you don't think about, okay, something. And then you might be managing things. You might be managing finances. You might be like you said, Marianne, you're the person they call to say, well, this happened. And so on. You know, when something happens and that person has to go to the ER, they're calling you and you're showing up. And there's so much going on. So I think it's a great question because a lot of people are giving care right now, and they might not identify themselves as caregivers. And that's certainly their prerogative. I think what it does is it skews our perspective on how many people are actually giving care. And there's so many people that are giving care right now. And are they being supported? You know, are they being supported in their community, in their state? You know, how are they being supported? You know, and those numbers are not accurate because so many people think, well, no, I live 2 states over, so I'm not really the caregiver. But it's like, man, if you're doing stuff, you're a caregiver. So I think it's a great question, and I'm glad that we introduced it into the conversation. And I loved your answer, Florrie. So that was, you know, you really carried a lot of it. You carried a lot of it, and I totally get that guilt piece. And then it's lovely to hear you acknowledge that you needed to take care of you, and that meant, you know, some of his care is being taken care of, so I don't have to be there 24/7. So that's really wonderful. Anyway, that was my comment.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christy. Ruth, what did you want to add to the conversation?
Well, I wanted to add on that subject. I was also a long distance caregiver. And the hardest part for me was I hired a private caregiver to be with my mother, and I had not met her. Mm-hmm. My cousin knew her, but I had not met her. And I'm in California. My mother was in Rhode Island. And those first weeks, I would toss and turn at night and think, there's a stranger taking care of my mother. And I just felt consumed with guilt and worry. And, you know, it was horrible. And, you know, then finally I was able to go and meet her, and she was wonderful. And we established a great working relationship, but it's tough. It's a whole different challenge when it's long distance. But what I was going to ask you, Florrie, is if you tell us a little bit about how or why you decided to write the book, and how you found the writing process. Was it cathartic for you? Was it emotionally painful? How long did it take? You know, any of that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that question the best I can. I guess I should start by saying that Chuck was a writer. After his teaching career, he became a writer of a classroom periodical for the same company that does My Weekly Reader. I don't know if you probably are too young to remember that, but because a classroom periodical. And he just said his audience was bigger because the high school students he was writing for were not reading to grade level. Anyway, he was a writer. And then the irony was that words were taken away from him. And he said to me a few times when I was just in his room with him, "Are you going to write about this?" And the first time he said it, I was like, what? Write about what? And then I realized he meant this, what was happening to us. And I think the meaning implicit was, I can't, so you do it. He had a journalist's heart, and he really wanted people to know our story. I'm quite sure he did. But I didn't write much of that story till after he died. I wrote, I think, the one chapter on the Irish New Year celebration that I just talked about. But it took me about 2 years after he died to really even engage in that process. And then it probably took 2 or 3 years, not writing constantly, obviously, but just took me a period of time with different perspective on it to come up with a manuscript. And then this funny thing happens when you're writing about your caregiving experience or other experiences you may have, that you're both the observer and you're the sufferer. So you're kind of taking a step back and telling your story and figuring out what happened by writing about it, if that makes sense. You sort of have a little bit, you can step back a little bit and tell the story as an observer, but you are also the person in the story. So it gives you a different perspective. It doesn't change what happened, but it gives you, for me, I think it just taught me that those 6 years were part of our marriage. They were not the whole part of the marriage. They were just one part of it. And over time, I've put it in a perspective of, yeah, that was a hard time. We did it together. I think if we had not been through that time, we would not have known how much we loved each other. So there's that. Yeah, so it was therapeutic. Yeah, I cried a lot when I wrote it. And I had a great developmental editor who told me that I had left out all my emotions. I just told the story, so I had to go back and put in like how I felt about what was happening. So she enabled me to do what I needed to do with the story, and eventually I found my voice. But thank you for asking the question. It's I think a lot of people process this type of experience through art, whether it be music or writing or painting or whatever you do, gardening, knitting. I think art is a way of processing grief that serves us well.
Great answer. Thank you.
And you had kept a journal for all or most of the journey. Is that right?
I kept a journal. I actually was just looking at my pages. I kept a journal for the first 6 months in excruciating detail.
Right.
These are the pages I kept.
Oh my goodness.
You can see they're like fool's cap. I wrote everything that happened for the first 6 months, and then 335 pages. It was really a way of processing what was happening, because I just couldn't believe how my life had changed. So that's what I did. And then at the end of that year, I put them all in a paper bag and put them in the back of a closet and said, I'm not going to do this anymore. But I did do a little journaling, Marianne, in the remaining 5.5 years. And I also sent some updates to friends and family periodically, and I saved some of those, and that helped me too. It really does help process what's happening to you to journal. I think some others of you wanted to talk, so I'll be quiet for a while.
Anne had her hand raised. So.
Hey, Florrie.
Hey.
I'm so honored to have been the person who brought Florrie into AlzAuthors. Your book was so moving and just beautifully written, and I'm just so glad that you're here and been able to share it with other people. And I wanted to ask how you navigated the emotional transition from, Chuck continued to be your spouse, but from, sort of a partner spouse to caregiving your spouse. That's such a big shift. And I imagine it was very gradual, but I would love to hear how you process that.
I'm not sure. It was gradual, for sure. It was a gradual learning that caregiving is reciprocal, and he was giving me things back. to a large extent, it was a passage of time and just getting used to this being the new normal, that he was going to be living separately and I was going to be his daily visitor. And there's a lot of grieving that goes on, grieving of what you expected your life was going to be. Just knowing that this very dynamic and engaging man was now very vulnerable. And that was a gift he gave to me, allowing me to see him in complete vulnerability, like when I would give him a bath.
Wow.
You know, he couldn't do it for himself. So it felt like a holy act to wash him, you know. I don't know how I navigate it. It's a great question, Anne. Do you have an answer to it? I mean, I know you were a caregiver for your mom.
I mean, you talked a lot about sort of that back and forth of things being difficult and then finding the blessing, and then things being difficult and finding the blessing. And I think that was how I survived, really leaning into both the hard times, which allowed me to then be open to the blessing and the joy, the small joys, I guess, sort of allowing myself to shrink into each moment was valuable. It wasn't this grand plan that maybe I thought I was going to have my mother, you know, all my life, but shrinking into these sweet times that would, you know, she would be aware for just a moment and know who I was. So.
Yeah, you kind of have to concentrate on what's there, not on what's not there anymore.
Yeah.
I think one of the gifts that he gave you, Florrie, because you were so much younger than him and kind of a child bride and probably dependent a lot on him and his wisdom and everything, but you had to become like a decision maker and be the one in charge. And he says that to you in the book you wrote. He said, you don't ask me for advice anymore.
Yeah.
And so it was preparing you really to be independent and on your own.
That's a lovely thought, Marianne. I hadn't really thought about that before, that was another gift that he gave me. Humor is another one. I thought maybe I could just read something really quickly to the point of going on, needing respite. And these are excerpts from my journal, the one I just held up, and they're short excerpts, so don't go to sleep yet. This first one was before we knew he had Lewy body dementia. It was about 2 months after his stroke. So just see if you hear a transformation between this one and the one I'll read next. This one says, day 53, I'm experiencing a lot of negativity, anxiety, depression, and despair. Fortunately, it comes and goes. There's a desperate feeling of wanting out of this life I now have, of wanting Chuck to participate more mentally in making plans for his future, of facing the progressive nature of Parkinson's. We thought he had Parkinson's, and wondering if and how I can adapt the house, if and when to transfer him to another facility, or to stay home and hire more care. How long will our money hold out? Should I sell our house? How much do I need to give before it becomes too much? What would Chuck do with me if the tables were turned? So many thoughts, so much uncertainty. And then after I'd had a chance to take a little respite, my sister-in-law came and said she would see Chuck and I should just go away. So I went out to the Washington coast and I walked the beaches a lot. And then when I came home, I wrote this in my journal. My thought at the moment is that it's a blessing to be able to take care of him, to ease him to wherever he's going, not to complain about who will take care of me, but to accept that this is my life now, to accept it as a privilege, an act of love and compassion, not to fight, not to quibble or complain, just to accept it. I see transformation there. Of course, I have to add that I didn't always stay in that latter state, because it's more of a roller coaster, right? But even if I could just envision that it was a blessing, or say, this is how one is compassionate to people we love. This is giving me an opportunity to give him the love that I've always felt and not been able to express it in this kind of tangible way. So there were hard days after that, for sure. But I think ultimately we were all changed.
For sure. Did anybody have anything to add to that?
I'm here.
Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to say I love the title of the book. It was very captivating to me. I took care of my mother-in-law, who was my dearest friend before she became my mother-in-law. So not the typical relationship. And I never wrote about that caregiving experience. And my sister has been diagnosed with primary progressive aphasia, the kind where she's losing, it's hard to find words and very hard to understand what you're saying. And I really feel like I need to write about my experience, but I have never written. This is the first book club I've ever gone to. First of all, I love AlzAuthors. It has been, I'm going broke. I'm buying all the books, and I've gone to my library and they don't have any. So I'm going to go to the director and tell her about you and try and get her to start buying the book so I don't have to. But no, it's great. I'm supporting all the authors. So, but I have a journal, and I just feel I don't know if it's too scary to write about my sister. She has a twin who's very involved also. We talk like every day. It's the early stages, but we're definitely facing a lot. My sister is planning on coming to live with me. So I'm preparing, but I just wondered if anyone, I don't know if you were all authors or if you had any suggestions on just how to get out the writing. I just thought your book was wonderful. I'm just soaking up everything I can to learn, but I feel like I need to write too. So I wondered if you had a suggestion or if anyone else did.
Anyone?
Yeah. Who would like to respond to that?
I think what you said, Florrie, that you were journaling during the time, and then later, after your husband passed away, it was a couple of years before you wrote the book. And my book also I didn't start till a couple of years after my mother passed away. But I was not journaling, but mine was a work of fiction, so it's kind of a different process for me. But I think it would be hard to really writing the book while things are happening, but definitely keeping a record of it and making notes and, your reactions to things and what's going on would be very important.
I have no intention of writing a book. I'm talking about, I can't even, I'm just having a really hard time just starting journaling. I don't know what it is. There's no book coming from me. And could I ask you what book you wrote? Because I'll probably buy that too.
Oh, sure. Well, it's called Stage 7. It's next month.
Oh, that's the next one.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes. That's in my Amazon cart. Okay. Great.
Yay. Correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
So I'll jump in here. I wanted to say, if you're not intending to write a book, that's fine. It maybe what you write turns into a book. Who knows? But I think I think writing can be so therapeutic. It can feel overwhelming if you're not if that's not something that you normally do, or you never really kept a journal or that kind of thing. One of the things I did, now I've always been a journal writer, but when I was in the midst of caring for my parents, I was so wrung out, and I was also raising 2 children and working full time. It was a lot. Wow. I wrote letters every night. My way of praying was to write a letter to God every night. That was just how I could do it. I had to get it out of my head, because otherwise it was running around in my head all night long and I wasn't sleeping. So I would just literally say, dear God, okay, here's what I got for you today. This is what's happening. This is how I'm feeling. Help me with this. Please help this person with this. I don't know. It was just my way of processing it. And so because it was a letter, it was easier for me to write a little bit. And I don't know why, but that's just something that worked for me at that time. So that's another thought for you. Sometimes if we're writing to someone and we're telling them something, it might feel like we're not, trying to create some piece of literature or something like that. So anyway, that's a thought for you.
I'll just jump on, add to that, Christy. I love the idea of writing a letter. Other ways, I've also journaled, but you could just write lists of, these are the things I don't want to think about. This is the bad stuff that's happening. Just sort of even set a timer for 5 or 10 minutes and just let it all out. Whatever it is you don't really want to write about or think about, that's one way. And you could think about writing a poem. You could go, to a beautiful spot in nature, and it's amazing. If you start writing about nature, suddenly that nature takes on a form of something that has to do with, the situation that you're in. So, there's so many different entry points into writing, and it's finding what works for you. If there's a fun way. I always find writing as it's a joyful activity, and something that, one thing it did, I wrote about my mother. And so it brought me closer to her, and it reminded me I could write about the good times. I could write about the hard times. I could process all kinds of things. So those are just some other thoughts.
Excellent. Yes, Ruth.
I just want to say also, it isn't all about the writing. What about the reading? All that reading, every story you read, you learn from, and it can help you to cope with what you have to cope with in your own life. I think that's a big thing.
Yeah, and you could go on the AlzAuthors website. There's a search bar, and you could type in that diagnosis that your sister has, see if it pops up in any of the other books, or even like about speech and language and things you might discover there are other books on that particular subject.
Yeah, I did that, and I bought another book and read that, and it was great. Yeah.
Which one was that? Do you remember?
The last 10 days.
Okay.
It was rough.
Yeah, I was going to say that one, Martha Roggio. Yeah,
yes.
Really good book.
But he had what my sister has.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was quite a man.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was an amazing story. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Those are great ideas. Thank you.
Thanks. Roseanne, did you want to add something?
So I did write a book about taking care of my mom called My Mother Has Alzheimer's and My Dog Has Tapeworms, A Caregiver's Tale. But I wrote as R. Lynn Barnett. But I had, for Dor, who asked the question, I had a pad behind my head, behind our bed. And sometimes I would get ideas in the middle of the night and I would jot them down. And when I first started doing this, my husband would say, "Are you all right? Like, are you hurting?" And then after a while, he'd say, "Are you inspired?" So, sometimes I would find that I would get ideas, just to write them down, not really knowing at the time that they would become a book. But, it helped me to have a pad handy. So just in case I had an idea, I could jot it down.
Mm-hmm. That's very good advice as well. Another thing is to speak too. You don't necessarily have to write, but you could make recordings. We on our phones and things, I have recording apps and stuff, and you could just speak what it is that you had to say, and then it would be saved. And then there are other tools that would transcribe that into text for you if you wanted to put it on paper. And you need to write with the intention that nobody else is going to read it. So then you can be honest. Because, you might feel like, well, what if my sister finds this? Or, somebody else, your other sister. And what will they think about what I'm saying here? And there's a lot of privacy issues too. I know like some of the authors have had with revealing things that are very personal and private in a family. And there is still a lot of stigma attached to these conditions. So people feel, stifled by that as well. So that's another consideration. And I mean, there's a lot of things we could talk for an hour about writing about this, I think. But those are some things to keep in mind.
There are also morning pages. Have you heard of morning pages?
No.
Some of you have, where you just get up in the morning and you just do stream of consciousness for about 3 pages or 2 pages or whatever. And you just do it every day. And does anyone know the name of the author of that book? But if you look up morning pages, just Google it. You might get that might be a way for you to do it. And it is, as Marianne said, it's just a private thing, just writing for yourself. So there's no wrong way to write it. You're doing it.
It's Julia Cameron.
Is that from The Artist's Way?
Yes.
Julia Cameron. Yeah.
That's it.
All right. Does anybody have anything else? Because we're getting close to the end of our hour.
Yeah. I'm concerned about how the family is going to react when my memoir comes out. How did you deal with the family, revealing all these stories? Did they react all right? Did they support you? Did they wonder why you did this to them?
I was very fortunate that my family really supported my both our decisions about end of life choices and things like that. And so I didn't have much of that. I mean, every now and then one of my kids might have said, well, Mom, when you told that story, that actually happened. That didn't happen in Connecticut. It happened in Rockford or something. It was like, but it wasn't a big deal for them. But I understand it can be. There are tender issues that.
Yeah. Well, it lives the same story, but their version is different. So I think that's when people start having issues because they didn't quite experience it or see it the way you did.
Yeah.
Especially if there's had been conflict during the journey itself.
I wonder if I could follow up on Ruth's comment about the title of my book before we say goodbye. I mean, some of you may know because you've read it, but I had a little reservation about using Be Brave because I thought that I didn't mean that people just needed to chin up and soldier on. The title came from Chuck. He was always very good at titling things. But when he made his decision to stop eating and drinking, which now has a name, he said, voluntary stoppage of eating and drinking. He explained this to his doctor. He was able to explain it to his doctor and the director of nursing. We had a meeting at the nursing home, and the doctor supported him and said, we'll take away, we'll keep you off your medications except those for comfort. And I think that we should involve hospice. And so then he left and the director of nursing left the room and I was alone with Chuck. I got him back in bed and I said, well, I'm going to go home now and call hospice. And he looked at me and he said, be brave, which meant a lot to me because it meant he still understood that was going to be a difficult thing for me to do. That showed me that he still had, the capacity to know that we were kind of in it together. This was going to be hard, but this was his decision. And then in the epilogue that comes up again, but I'll save that for another time, or you can just read it. But after he died, the expression came back, and so that's how it got its title.
Well, it is beautiful. It's a beautiful book. beautiful cover, everything about it. And I even like the size. I'm big about sizes, how it feels in my hand, and it feels really good.
Well, good.
So thank you, Florrie.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing all that you did. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you all for coming and being an attentive and lovely audience and having things to contribute. And I really have enjoyed my time with you all. And blessings on all the work that you do and the people you care for. Lucky to have you.
Thank you so much. Okay.
And
I just want to thank.
Oh, I was going to say, you're probably going to mention this already, but our next book is.
Yeah, go ahead. You can.
Ruth Stevens, Stage 7, right? Yeah. Wonderful book. Yeah, there it is. Beautiful, wonderful book of fiction. And I just want to put a plug out there for fiction. You know, these non-fictions are so important, and we need the real details of what really happened in people's lives. But I think, too, the beauty of fiction is we get into characters and we can relate to them. And there's so many great relatable characters in Ruth's book. I loved that book, so it's great.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you, Christy. Appreciate that.
Looking forward to that one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you can learn more and register for the event with Ruth's book in the Books and Chit Chat channel in the Aging and Amazing community, or you will be receiving notifications from AlzAuthors newsletter. We send it out every week, so you're on that list now if you weren't already, and we will be sending out information on that and the links as well. And if you're not a subscriber to the newsletter, go on our website and then you can sign on. And we send out something every week introducing the latest author, the podcast, the special events, and more. And be sure to visit our blog, podcast, bookstore, and shop at AlzAuthors.com to find more resources for your dementia journey. And you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We share a wealth of resources for the dementia journey. And lastly, remember that you are not alone. One can sing a lonely song, but we chose to form a choir and create harmony. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening to Untangling Alzheimer's and Dementia, an AlzAuthors podcast. For more details on this episode, please see the show notes. If you enjoyed the podcast, please leave a review and subscribe to it on whichever platform you use to listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information on AlzAuthors, please visit AlzAuthors.com. While you're there, be sure to browse our online bookstore, where you will find hundreds of carefully vetted books on Alzheimer's and dementia. You can also find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Please email your thoughts on the podcast to alzauthors@gmail.com. We are a 501c3 charitable organization, totally reliant on donations to do what we do. If our authors' stories move you, please consider contributing to our cause. Remember, you are not alone. One can sing a lonely song, but we chose to form a choir and create harmony.
Hi, I'm Anne of AlzAuthors. When I was caring for my mother with dementia, I searched long and hard for memoirs and personal stories about other caregivers' experiences. I wanted to know not just how other people survived, but how they thrived. Unfortunately, at the time, there was not much available. That's why we created the bookstore at AlzAuthors.com. Now, busy caregivers can easily browse for just the right resource to guide them on their journey. Books are categorized by relationship and type of dementia, as well as genre. You'll find a helpful title in just minutes using our search tool. So, after the podcast, take a few moments to visit our bookstore at alzauthors.com/bookstore. Remember, you are not alone.